Donaciano Fierro had been the foreman of Rancho El Saguaro for 41 years when he saw the girl arrive along the dirt road, and the first thing he felt before understanding why was that something in his chest settled down after a long time of not settling. If you believe that blood and land always recognize each other no matter how many years pass, subscribe to Tales of the Old Countryside and turn on the bell so you don't miss any story. It was August in Sonora, and the sun fell vertical over the plain the way the Sonoran sun does when it wants you to understand who's in charge. The girl came on foot along the dirt road with a canvas sack slung over her shoulder that was too big for her body, and a way of walking that wasn't that of someone coming to visit, but of someone coming because there was no other place left to go. Donaciano saw her from the gate where he was checking the ironwork of the latch, and he stood still with the tool in his hand. She was tall for her age, which he later learned was 15, with black hair gathered in a braid, worn but clean clothes, and feet inside hurracks that someone had mended several times with different strips of leather. But it wasn't the clothing that stopped Donaciano. It was the way she walked, the step, the angle of the shoulders, the way she lifted her head when she saw the gate of the ranch and barely squared her jaw. That small gesture of someone preparing to be told no. Donaciano had seen that gesture once before, 16 years ago, in another woman. The girl reached the gate and looked at him directly, which is not what children who are afraid do, but what those who have learned that showing fear costs more than hiding it do. "I'm looking for work," she said. "Whatever it is. I know how to milk, I know how to sweep, I know how to carry." Donaciano did not respond immediately. He was looking at her in a way that to anyone else would have seemed discourteous, but in him was something else. It was the silence of someone reading something written in a language he thought he had forgotten. "What's your name?" he said at last. "Amparo, and whose daughter are you?" The girl tightened her jaw again. "Nobody's anymore." Donaciano nodded slowly. Then he stepped aside and opened the gate. The hands of Rancho El Saguaro had their opinions and didn't keep them quiet. Felipe, the most talkative, said that very afternoon that a girl in a hard-working ranch was a nuisance and a responsibility. Abundio, the cook, said that if she got hurt it would be everyone's problem. Doa and Gracia, who washed the ranch's clothes and ran the kitchen with more authority than anyone, said nothing but folded her arms in a way that said it all. Donaciano argued with none of them. He told them the girl was staying and that he answered for her, and that was that. Because in 41 years as foreman, he had earned the right to have his words end conversations. He gave her the small room next to the granary, the one they used to store tools when no one needed it. Amparo cleaned it in an hour without complaining and without asking for anything more than a rag and water. That first night, Donaciano brought her a plate of beans and a tortilla and stood in the doorway while she ate. "Where do you come from?" he asked. "From Hermosillo. Before that, from a ranch near Bavacora. And your mother?" Amparo took a moment to answer. She kept eating for a moment. "She died in February," she said. "From a fever that started in December and never stopped." Donaciano looked at the canvas sack in the corner. "Do you have anything of hers?" Amparo looked at him, weighing the question. Then she reached into the sack and took out two things. A small brass locket which she opened with her thumb to show him the photograph inside. A young woman, long-faced, with eyes that looked at the camera with the same directness as Amparo's. And a white cloth handkerchief folded in four, embroidered in one corner with two initials, RV. Donaciano looked at the handkerchief. Something inside him stopped hurting in a way he had not expected. "RV," he said softly. "Rosario Valenzuela," said Amparo. My mother. Don Asiano said nothing. He gave back the handkerchief. He said good night and went out. That night, he didn't sleep well. He got up before dawn, as he always did, but instead of going straight to the corral, he sat on the stone of the corridor with a palm hat in his hands, watching the Sonoran sky that hadn't yet decided between night and day. Rosario Valenzuela. 16 years ago. A woman who had arrived at that same ranch, with the same too big sack and the same step, and who had worked 3 years as a cook before leaving without saying where, taking with her something Don Asiano had never said out loud. Because in the ranches of Sonora there are things men of a certain generation learned not to say. Taking with her, he now understood. Much more than he had known. Amparo worked from the first dawn without anyone telling her how or when. She got up before the hands, lit the kitchen stove, heated the coffee, and placed tortillas on the comal with the efficiency of someone who has done it hundreds of times. Doa and Gracia arrived in the kitchen and found everything done and the girl washing the jugs without asking for approval. And Gracia did not cross her arms that morning. In the corral, Amparo milked the cows with a technique Don Asiano recognized. The same pressure, the same rhythm, the same gesture of speaking very softly to the animal while she worked. It was a technique he had taught Rosario 16 years ago, and which Rosario, evidently, had taught her daughter. Felipe, who watched her from the corral fence, said nothing that morning. At midday, he passed her his cup of coffee from his hand without her asking, which in the language of Sonoran ranch hands was a declaration of peace. Don Asiano watched her the whole first day without her knowing, or so he believed. In the afternoon, when Amparo was coming back from the pasture with a bucket in each hand, she glanced at him sideways and said, without stopping, "Have you seen enough yet?" Don Asiano almost smiled. So passed the first days. Amparo worked with a determination that was not that of someone wanting to impress, but of someone who didn't know any other way to be in the world. She learned quickly. She asked only when there was no way to figure out the answer, which is how those who are really going to learn. And she had with the animals a patience the animals recognized. The ranch's cattle accepted her before the men did, which is how it usually goes. Don Asiano taught her things. Not all at once, not in speeches. The way he had always taught, by doing and letting the other person watch until their hands understood what their ears had already heard. He taught her to read the Sonoran sky to know about water. He taught her to check the cattle's legs before the problem became visible, because on a ranch what you can see has already cost you. He taught her the name of each animal and the character of each one, which on a working ranch is information as important as any other. The embroidered handkerchief Amparo carried always in the pocket of her apron. Sometimes, when she was still for a moment, waiting for water to boil, resting a second between one task and the next, she would take it out and hold it for a moment without unfolding it. She didn't need to look at it. She only needed to know it was there. And then Amparo saw something that made her drop the bucket. It was one afternoon when she went into Don Asiano's tool room to look for a rope he had asked her for. The room was orderly and dry, with the tools hanging in their places and a wooden box in the corner for the ranch's papers. On top of the box, placed there with the naturalness of something that had been in that spot a long time, was a handkerchief. White. Folded in 4, embroidered in one corner. Amparo approached slowly. She took it. She unfolded it. The initials were different from her mother's, but the embroidery was the same. The same stitch, the same thread. The same way of making the letter S with a curve that her mother always made the same way, and that Amparo had also learned to make the same way, because Rosario had taught her to embroider before teaching her anything else. D, F. Donaciano Fierro. Amparo left the handkerchief exactly where it was and went to look for the rope. That night she said nothing, nor the next day. She kept what she had seen in the place where one keeps things that need to be understood completely before being spoken of. It was Donaciano who spoke first. One Saturday afternoon, when the hands had gone to the village and the ranch was quieter than usual, he told Amparo to sit on the stone of the corridor, and he sat too, with the palm hat on his knees the way he always did when he was about to say something that cost him. "I knew your mother," he said. Amparo did not respond. She waited. She worked here 3 years. She left in the winter. She didn't say where. He paused. "I never knew why." "Because she was expecting," said Amparo softly, "and she didn't want anyone to know yet." Donaciano turned his head to look at her. Amparo reached into her apron pocket and pulled out her mother's handkerchief. She unfolded it. The initials RV in the corner, with that curve in the S that was unmistakable. "She taught me to embroider like this," she said. She said she had learned it from someone who embroidered the same way. Donaciano looked at the handkerchief for a long moment. "Did she say anything to you about me?" he asked at last. Amparo thought about the answer carefully. "She told me there was a man in Sonora who was truly good," she said. "And that real goodness doesn't make noise." The silence that followed was the kind that does not weigh, but rests. Donaciano said nothing more that day. But the following week he spoke with the owner of the ranch, Don Prospero Irigoyen, an older man who trusted Donaciano with a trust built up over 40 years of honest work. He explained what he knew. Not everything, but enough. He told him the girl was trustworthy and that if Don Prospero agreed, he wanted Amparo to have a formal place at the ranch, with a real salary and papers that said so. Don Prospero observed her for 2 days. Then he said yes. Felipe, who heard about it from Abundio, the cook, before anyone announced it officially, came into the kitchen that afternoon with a different way of entering, without the comment on the tip of his tongue that he usually brought. He said to Amparo, looking at the wall, "Good work with the cows. They're better since you came." It was the longest thing Felipe had said to her since the first day. Doa Engracia said nothing. But that night she left at the door of the granary room an extra blanket, folded, because in Sonora August is hot, but the mountain nights drop quickly. Amparo found it when she came back from her last round of the corral. She took it, smelled it, lavender soap, the same Engracia used in everything, and brought it inside. The months passed with the rhythm of ranches that work well, full of small things which, in their sum, are big. Amparo learned Rancho El Saguaro the way one learns the places where one is going to stay, not all at once, but in parts, until the body knows on its own where to go in the dark and the eyes recognize every variation of the sky. Donaciano taught her to read the ranch's contracts, something he had not done with any other hand, because Amparo was the only one who had asked him how they worked without being ashamed of not knowing. Rosario Valenzuela's handkerchief lived in the pocket of Amparo's apron every day. The locket with the photograph she hung in her room on the most accessible beam were the first things she saw on waking, were her mother's eyes looking at the camera with that directness Amparo had inherited without anyone having to teach it to her. The handkerchief embroidered with the initials DF remained in Donaciano's tool room, in the same place where it had always been. But Amparo noticed that now it had less dust on it, as if someone were cleaning it more often. When autumn came to the Sonoran highlands and the cattle of Rancho El Saguaro fattened on the last pastures of the year, the afternoon the herd returned to the corral was one of those afternoons that stay kept, the dust raised by the hooves, the sound of the cowbells. the color of the Sonoran sky, which at that hour is an orange that doesn't repeat in any other state of Mexico. Amparo was standing at the corral gate, opening the way through, and Don Asiano was next to her with the palm hat on his head and his arms resting on the fence. Both watching the cattle return with that quiet satisfaction people who work the land have when the land responds. Felipe passed behind them with a half-finished comment about the weight of a young bull, and Abundio the cook shouted from the kitchen that the coffee was ready, and Doa Ingracia was hanging clothes on the line with the same movement of arms as always, but her arms were no longer crossed over them. Sometimes life pushes us toward the place where we always should have been, along roads we did not choose, and through losses we did not deserve. Amparo Valenzuela arrived at Rancho El Saguaro looking for work, and found something her mother had kept for her, without telling her she was keeping it. A man who knew her story before knowing her, and a land that recognized her by her step, by her hands, by the way she speaks very softly to the cattle. That can't be learned. That is inherited. Who appeared in your life when no one else was looking at you anymore? If this story touched something in your heart, leave your comment below. Tell me what part of Mexico, or where else, you're watching from. Subscribe to the channel Tales of the Old Countryside, and turn on the bell so you don't miss any story, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the places where one belongs are sometimes waiting for one to arrive and find them. Until the next story. And they say in that corner of Sonora that when the herd of Rancho El Saguaro comes back at sunset, and you see the girl with the black braid standing at the gate opening the way through, and the old foreman beside her with the palm hat and his arms on the fence, the people of the road know, without needing to ask, that something there had been waiting a long time to close, and that it had finally closed.